Hi, I'm Dr. Ellis Orozco, and thanks for listening to this video podcast. I hope you have a great weekend. Hello, and thanks for joining us in the second episode of our The Well Bible Reading Journey podcast. It's great to have you with us today. We're in our second week of our Well readings, and this week we're going to be covering Genesis chapters 3, 4, and 5. Genesis chapters 4, 5, and 6, Matthew chapter 2, and Psalm chapter 2. But in the podcast today, we're probably going to be focusing more on Genesis chapter 4. It's another big chapter, just like Genesis chapter 3. There's a lot of things happening right now in the book of Genesis as God is revealing to us this, as I mentioned last week, this prehistory of humankind. Typically, what we know as history, contemporary history, starts around the year 2000 BC, about the time of Abraham. Is when history really starts. So this is all kind of prehistory. Now in Genesis chapter 4, we have the story of Cain and Abel. Now if you remember from last week, in Genesis chapter 3, God banishes Adam and Eve from the garden. They begin a family together, and they have two sons, Cain and Abel, and this is their story. Genesis chapter 4 is really about the ramifications of what we learned in Genesis chapter 3, the fall of humankind. Sin has come into the world. And we're going to see the outcomes of this sin played out in Genesis chapter 4, and again, actually in Genesis chapter 6, where we have the first murder, the first death, and it's a traumatic thing. So that's Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 5 gives us the history from all the way from from Adam all the way to Noah. And then Genesis chapter 6 begins the story of Noah. And again, it's setting up this wicked world that we live in. It's how wickedness has expanded and it continues to grow. It all started with the fall in Genesis chapter 3. By Genesis chapter 6, wickedness has kind of covered the land. Evil seems to be winning. We'll see this again and again in the Bible, where evil seems to be winning. And the message the Bible keeps telling us is, that may be so, but God is still in control. We're also maybe looking a little at Matthew chapter 2. This is the story of the Magi coming to visit baby Jesus, and the story of the Magi, and of course what Herod tries to kill baby Jesus, but the slaughtering of the innocent babies in Bethlehem, and then also the flight to Egypt and the return. That all happens in Matthew chapter 2. We'll be drawing some analogies to that. So that's where we're going this week. Now remember, again, big picture. God is giving us the prehistory of humankind and how sin has come into the world and fractured everything. And the consequences of that are that it seems like evil keeps popping up. So let's talk a little bit about that. And to help us do that, I want to welcome again this week, Amber and Craig. Amber, Craig, thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of this. I really enjoyed our conversation last week, and I know that God is going to bless our conversation this week. So we've been looking at Genesis chapter 4. I know you've been studying this week, Genesis chapter 4 especially, specifically. And I guess what we see here happening can be a little perplexing for some. And so at the beginning of the story, it's Cain and Abel are adults, and they are offering, they're beginning to worship God by offering him their sacrifices, right? And Abel was in animal husbandry. He offered the first fruits of his whatever God had given him. And Cain was more of a farmer, and so he offered his offering. So kind of the first question that comes up, because it tells us that God accepted Abel's offering, but did not accept Cain's offering. And there's a sense in there that what that means is that Abel seemed like he was being blessed in some way, and Cain was feeling like he wasn't blessed in some way. And so in looking at this, did God reveal anything to you about why? Why was Cain's not accepted where Abel's was accepted? Amber, did you get anything on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ellis. The first thing I wanted to clarify is that because we all have at least a basic understanding of the full body of Scripture, we sometimes will put pieces of things that are coming in the future into our current earlier text. So for example, we have to be careful not to put our Levitical law mindset into what's happening here. And so So it's talking about this offering. And when you look at some of the debates of why one was accepted and one was rejected, some people like to argue that because Abel's was a blood sacrifice. But remember, this is way before all the Levitical law. So I decided to dig on that word specifically, offering instead of sacrifice. And so basically the most simplest way to describe that word is just simply it's an act of worship. In more in detail, this act of worship is a literal gift or present. Usually it's something that's bestowed to God, and it is always the words left me. I hate when that happens. It is always an option. Like it's not something they have to do.
Right.
And it's never never blood. It is something else. This offering isn't blood. This offering was a gift out of their own heart. And so when I was looking into this further, I was thinking, okay, so it's not what it was. So it's not what it was that was pleasing to God in worship. Then what was it? It left me pondering.
Right.
So I started to dig a little deeper, Ellis, and I found that in Hebrews 11, which is we like to call it the Faith Hall of Fame, right? Kind of a loving thing. People call it
he mentions Cain and Abel, yeah.
Exactly. Abel is in there. And so Abel is one of our Hall of Famers here. And Abel, it says specifically that the reason why his was accepted was because of his faith. And so that leaves me to think more that the reason Cain's was rejected versus Abel's accepted was a heart matter, was a character matter, and not what it was. We sometimes like to get caught up on what it was instead of what the action of the heart was. And so my last detail that I wrote down when I was studying this was basically it was because of Abel's faith, not because of his flock. Yeah. And so, Ellis, I wanted you to maybe to help us understand what is pleasing to God when we worship.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, God tells us over and over again in the scriptures that he doesn't look at the outward appearance. He doesn't look at how great the gift is in terms of human perspective, how much money you give, how awesome your gift is. He looks at the heart. And you see story after story in this with King David, and when Samuel was coming to him, God specifically said to Samuel, "Don't look at his outward appearance. He's not going to be the one who looks the best, maybe, but he has this heart, and so look at the heart." God looks at the heart. Jesus with the widow's mite story, where people were bringing all their awesome gifts and kind of some of them even flaunting it, and there's this poor widow who just quietly, no one really notices her, but she goes and lays in basically what's less than a penny into the offering and that day, and Jesus said she gave more than the rest because she gave out of her need. Her heart was right. So yeah, I think you're right on. We shouldn't focus necessarily that it's not that Abel's gift was better than Cain's. Right. It was the heart. He goes on to in there to really talk. Of course, Cain gets upset. We know the story. You've read it. And he goes out and he kills his brother. He lures him out into the open country. So here we have this premeditated murder because he's jealous, or he's feeling insignificant. He's feeling left out. There is some indication as well. People will speculate, well, did Adam and Eve play favorites too? It's an old story where one child feels mom and dad like him better or him more, all that kind of thing. But it's all this stuff that's going on inside of Cain, this turmoil, this anger, this bitterness that he lets it brood. He ends up killing his brother. God comes to him and says, "Where's your brother?" Right? And he says, "Well, why are you asking me? Am I my brother's keeper?" Right? And here we come back really to this subject of responsibility. We heard it last week with Adam and Eve, who didn't want to take responsibility. Just from a practical and even a theological perspective, Craig, on this, what are your thoughts on this, where God comes to him and says, where's your brother? And he says, I'm not responsible, basically.
Yeah, it's really an interesting interplay here, and we see it really start and pick up the pattern that started with God interacting with Adam and Eve after their sin, after they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil last week in Genesis 3. Mm-hmm. We see him ask the question, and as we talked about last week, that really does become God opening up space for Cain to take responsibility and to ask for forgiveness and to seek repentance. He doesn't do that. Cain, basically, just like Adam and Eve and the serpent did, they're deflecting and minimizing and trying to find another way forward that doesn't include taking responsibility for what he's done. And essentially, that's wrapped up in the question of, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Well, and we've all been asking that question for years. That basically, history is a question of us asking each other or ourselves, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And so, throughout Scripture, of course, that's going to echo, since that's part of the human questioning of ourselves, our questioning to God when we're held accountable, either by God or by each other, or by just the demands of justice. And then you come in and really see an interesting interplay of that question echoing Jesus's response and his other question of, "Who do you say that I am?" So that interplay of am I my brother's keeper from our perspective, and who do you say that I am from Jesus's perspective, becomes that theme of community rights versus individual rights, responsibility versus rights at a more fundamental level. Do I have to go get a COVID shot, or do I have right to my own body? Right? We see it playing out in our society today, not to make this political. But when we understand that we have rights, yes, but more, we have responsibilities that are attached to those rights. It's more than just about us. It's about our community, and it's about our right relationship with God. And that plays out as we head into verse 16, as God presents the consequence, or the sentence, maybe we would say, onto Cain for his actions. You'll be a wanderer in the land of Nod. And taking a look at what that word Nod means in the ancient Hebrew text, it literally means the land of wandering. Wandering, wandering. Cain becomes a wanderer, literally. He has been stripped by his own actions of his identity of humanity that God has given him and created him for, and he has to go out and find his identity again and who he is.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. Especially the modern day application about rights. We hear a lot about rights and rights and rights. And again, as you mentioned, certainly we all should have certain basic human rights. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. But that's really not the language of Scripture. That's certainly not the Jesus language. Jesus never talked about rights. In fact, Jesus said, if you follow me, you may not have a place to lay your head. You may not have a place to live. You're going to be persecuted. He told his disciples literally, right? He says, "Pick up your cross and follow me." That's a symbol of really laying down all your rights and to follow him. Now you're completely his. And if you go even further back with Jesus to the pre-incarnate Jesus, in Philippians chapter 2, the Apostle Paul paints this picture of Jesus as the Son of God giving up all of his rights, just emptying himself and becoming nothing, even going to the cross. He certainly had the right to jump off the cross if he wanted to, and he had the power to do it, but he laid all of that down, giving up all of his rights. And so you have this same situation here. It seems like Cain is saying, my rights. And even at the very end, where God pronounces the sentence and he's going to be banished again. It's interesting. I hadn't really thought of it before, but this mother and father being banished from Adam and Eve from the garden, and now this is replaying itself, where now their son Cain is being banished from that land to yet another land, the land of Nod, as you've already explained, Craig, meaning having this particular significance. Some believe that it meant that he went to becoming the forager and hunter kind of community, which was not as established as, say, an agricultural community in antiquity, and as anthropologists have studied these things. But whatever it was a less stable life, right? It was a less stable life. In fact, he says, my sentence is too great for me, right? Again, you've got to give me some rights, right? People will try to kill me, right? And it says that God put this mark on him, and said God put a mark on Cain and said, no, when people see this mark, they will know that you're still protected by me. They will not kill you. Amber, did you get anything? You're our guru word studier. I love you digging into these words. Did you get anything on the mark of Cain? That's a real controversial thing, I know.
It is controversial, and I did decide to dig into it a little bit. This word mark is this Hebrew word of oath. I think that's how you pronounce it. Not an expert, just like the word study more than know how to pronounce it, but oath is how I'm going to pronounce it. And, honestly, we are left to speculate what exactly the mark is. It doesn't tell us. The author chooses not to tell us. And so instead of trying to focus or weed through all the theories that Ellis, you were just talking about, there's a lot of theories of what this could be.
Yeah.
Instead of weeding through the theories, I decided to focus on what the author chose to tell us. And so he gave us this word mark, or this word also used as sign. It's often translated as sign in our English translations. And so I decided to look into it. And what's really fascinating about this word, this mark, is that it really, over and over again, when it shows up, it's really given us two characteristics of God, two very distinct characteristics of God. So I have a list, I have a few small lists, so I don't want to miss them. So I'm going to read them here. The first one is the Cain story. It's the first one, and where this word is used. And so God is bringing his justice, because if you think about it, he deserves death. Abel deserves vengeance for what happened. It's the first human murder documented in human history. I mean, and not only that, but it was brother on brother. It was family. It was blood. It was horrific, like you said earlier, Ellis. And you notice that God doesn't throw away people. You said that this morning in church, that God is not in the business of killing people. He's not in the business of just discarding people. So instead of discarding Cain, he gives two things. So he gives his justice, but he does his mercy, and he does it with this mark. We don't know sure what it is quite yet. And then in Genesis 9, the same word is used as a sign. We have a rainbow as a sign for his judgment, but also his rescue.
So that's interesting. So you're saying that the word used in Genesis with the flood, with the rainbow, as a sign. I remember talking about it being a sign. That's the exact same word.
That's exactly the same word here as mark. It's the word oath.
Good.
And it's the exact same word. And it showed up a couple more times. This is fascinating. It also shows up as a mark when we're talking about God's judgment, but also his faithfulness to keep his promise to raise up a seed through Abraham. That sign was circumcision.
Okay,
it uses that word circumcision as a sign of God's promise, holding his promise of keeping that seed going through Abraham's line. And there's several more, Ellis. There's one about the plagues. It uses those signs, the plagues. It also is the Passover lamb. When you have the blood on the doorpost, it's the same word oath. When you have the Rahab scarlet cord in Jericho, that's oath. That's the sign. And so it's used over and over again. And so I decided to kind of summarize it with this. I think it's less about this mystery mark. And this is what I think the author wants us to know. I think we're going to need to understand that Cain's sign is an archetype, basically meaning the first of its kind, or an archetype of all these signs of sparing. In each instance, Yahweh could strike and bring ruin. The key word is ruin, but instead he marks us with the sign of his mercy, and as a visual sign over and over and over again in Scripture. So anyways, I think that's kind of what the author wants us to see here, less about what it was, but that God is over and over again. He's given us two sides of himself. And anyways, I think that was beautiful.
No, that's good. That's awesome. Because in the past, different controversial, of course, ideas, but mostly people, it seems traditionally have interpreted this mark to be a negative, right? And so they use it, and they'll even try to associate it with certain groups of people, certain races, and all that kind of thing, and it's a negative. But if you look at it carefully and do this study, it actually was a positive. The mark was a good thing. It wasn't a negative thing. Cain felt like he was going to be this horrible fugitive the rest of his life, and that he was going to live this miserable life. But God gave him a new life with the mark that protected him. That's excellent, and is a promise. In Cain's case, it was a promise. It was a promise that no one would kill him, that no one would harm him. There's an interesting thing too going on psychologically with Cain. I don't know, Craig, if you want to jump in at any point, where he seems to have this. I mean, he had this brooding kind of bitterness and anger almost, and then So even at the end there, it's like almost this complex where he feels like he doesn't deserve God's love. He doesn't deserve to live. And as Amber, you pointed out, he didn't. None of us. If we all got what we deserved, none of us would be around, right? But he felt like he didn't deserve to live, and yet God gives him the mark. Craig, did you find anything, just out of curiosity, in Matthew chapter 2? Because that's the other passage we're reading, Matthew chapter 2. It seems there's some relationship, because you have a lot of violence and murder and death in Matthew chapter 2 as well. Do you want to share a little bit about what you learned there?
You do, in fact. We have a continued land of wandering, or land of wonders of life outside of God, in the form of Herod and wanting to seek the king that the Magi are searching for, because he feels like the child is a threat to him. Again, he's all out for him. He's sin is turning him inward, and he's all about himself and nobody but himself. And as he tries to deceive the Magi though are faithful. They are walking that way of God, just as we see in Genesis 5. To play on one of our other chapters for this week, we see Enoch and Noah walking with God by faith. And then we see in Hebrews 11, to call that chapter to mind again. As Amber said before, we have Noah in verse 7 of Hebrews 11, talking about him building the ark was his faith, and it was according to him as righteousness. So we have this idea of righteousness being right relation. There's a couple of dimensions here. There's right relationship with God and with each other. Again, playing on the communal versus individual aspect that we saw in Genesis 4. And then we have the straight and narrow way, the walking of that straight path. And so we have the Magi walking that straight path, following the star, looking for God. And we have even Gentiles, arguably they're probably coming from Persia or Babylon, looking for the child, this king of Jerusalem, or the Israelites that has been born, that they're searching for to worship. They are following that star that they've seen through natural revelation, that they've seen in God's nature. And as they understand what the signs mean, they are faithfully following as much as they know about God, they're following that. So again, we have this interplay, a picture of this righteous walking, this walking with God by faith throughout Genesis 5, just to compare and contrast with the life Cain is leading, along with the Magi, who we've seen it even in New Testament times, that you don't have to have the special revelation of Torah or having lived as part of in this case, Cain's direct line, and in the Genesis 5 and 6, Seth's direct line, to understand that you can have this relationship with God and understand what he's saying. And Psalm 2 will come in to bookend that understanding that those who trust God walk by faith, right? So it kind of books into it nicely.
Yeah, that's great. You have that connection there between the readings this week. That's very interesting, because in you have this evil that's being done in Matthew chapter 2, and you have the evil that's being done in Genesis chapter 4 as well, and you have all this kind of death comes into the world. Jesus comes into the world, the incarnate Son comes into the world, and right away they're trying to kill him, right? The world is trying to kill him. He escapes to Egypt, but then when he returns, they're going to try to kill him again, all the way to the end of his life. They're going to be trying to kill him. There's this scene that's especially powerful for me in Matthew chapter 2, where the Magi have left, and Herod realizes it, and he is going after Jesus. And so he's going to kill all the babies, right, in the area of Bethlehem who are under the age of 2. And so he goes to do that. God warns Joseph in a dream. And so Joseph collects his family, and they under the cover of night, they steal away to Egypt to escape. But the babies die, right? They come and they slaughtered all the babies. And this was a small village. It's estimated that there may have been 20 to 30 baby boys under the age of 2. I mean, one baby being murdered is horrific. Yeah. 20 is beyond imagination. But that was Herod's character. There's no doubt that Herod, that we know from history, would have done exactly that if his throne had been threatened. Herod the Great had already killed 2 of his own sons to protect his throne because he thought they were trying to take it away from him. He killed his favorite wife because he felt she was conspiring against him. At one point, Caesar Augustus says about Herod the Great, he says it's better to be Herod's pig than to be one of his sons. A pun on the idea that the Jews didn't eat pigs, right? They didn't kill pigs because they didn't eat pork. So yeah.
Ellis, this morning in your sermon, you had us think in our minds who's the evilest person in history you could think of, and you kind of named a few. And Ethan, my 6-year-old sitting next to me, he pops up. I mean, sometimes you don't know if they're listening, but they really are.
Yeah.
He pops up and he's like, Herod, he was really bad. Yeah. And so I was like, that's a great answer.
I love that. I love that.
I didn't know if you heard him, but he was really loud.
That's the child of a Bible scholar. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So he was a horrible, horrible person. And he kills the babies. And there's this scene of this weeping. And Matthew quotes from the Old Testament, the weeping in Ramah, the women weeping in Ramah. And Ramah was this place of great mourning. It was the place, Ramah was the spot in the Old Testament where during the exile, the those who were being taken off into exile, Jeremiah was going with him, the prophet, and they part ways at Ramah. So the exiles go off forever, and Jeremiah never sees them again. And so it's this place symbolically in their hearts. Ramah was this place of deep mourning. And so we see this in Matthew. We see it also in Genesis chapter 4. I can't imagine what this was like for Adam and Eve, right? I think especially of Eve, I don't know, just as a mom, having 2 children and one of them kills the other. A brother, your oldest son kills his younger brother. And this happens, right? This happens in life. This happens with families. Families have people. There are families out there. I know families who have had, this kind of thing happen in their family where one family member kills another family member. And it's horrific. Can you imagine? I can't imagine the pain, the great mourning, the great suffering. We think about Cain, suffering, and he did. But there was suffering all the way around. And so to me, it's just a sign. We're talking a lot about signs today, but of the kind of pain that comes into our world through sin. The suffering that we see in Bethlehem with all the babies dying and the moms and dads mourning. And then the suffering that we see in Genesis chapter 4, where you do one thing, you make one bad choice, and it's the ripple effect. How many people you have impact over? How many people suffer because of what we do? Right,
Ellis, that made me think. You were talking about Cain's suffering and that he went off and started this city, and then we know later in Scripture that there are these cities of refuge. Where people can come to if they've murdered someone and they haven't had trial quite yet. Mm-hmm. They can go to these safe places. I wonder sometimes if this Cain's story and his suffering, how he came and how he was marked and he was not going to be avenged, if that may have been the inspiration for these later city of refuges.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. That's a great question. In the Old Testament law, which, as Amber, you already said, came much later than this. So we have to be careful about reading back into a pre-Mosaic world. But one of the things that we see that is happening here is that we see kind of the foundation being laid for the Mosaic Law, where these are some of these, if you want to say common sense or just kind of natural law that we've always known. Cain knew right away that what he did was wrong. He didn't have the law yet. Moses had not spoken. But he knew in his soul that it was wrong to kill his brother. That's why he doesn't want to, that's why he's avoiding God, right? He's avoiding the question. So we see a lot of that happening. So there is this foundation being laid. So one of the foundations, the cities of refuge that you're talking about certainly were developed during the Mosaic period with the Mosaic Law. So one of the foundations for it could very well be the story of Cain, where there was this place of refuge that he could go to. The Old Testament law says the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, right? And that was actually, it's called the lex talionis, the law of retaliation. It was actually a limiting law. It was actually a law about mercy and grace, because in the old days before the law, and maybe even may have been the case in Cain's day, certainly in Noah's day, and in Jesus's day as well, is that the people in the world, that they would, if you killed my brother, I would go out and mafia style kill you, kill all your animals, wipe out your whole family, right?
Right.
Kill everybody. It's this revenge, right, thing.
Because see, Ellis is a mafia style. I'm sorry.
Yeah, mafia.
I
I mean,
picture of
that's the
Ellis
way
as a
it was.
mafia.
This is war. You killed my brother. We're going to war. I'm
Right.
killing your whole family.
Can't refuse.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, and the Mosaic Law came along and said, no, wait a minute, no. if someone kills someone, then they should pay for it with their own life, but not their whole family. Not, it was a limiting law, right? So it wasn't even necessarily the ideal, but it was limiting this really horrific behavior. And so you have that happening. So from the very beginning, before Moses even wrote his law, I think you see in God what's happening here is this kind of limiting law. He's saying, no, I don't throw people away. This is this is kind of a repeating thing coming through all of this, that we want to throw people away. We want people to pay. We want revenge. The Old Testament law also says, vengeance is mine, thus saith the Lord, right? The God says, I'm the one, if anyone's going to be in the vengeance business, it should be me, not you, right? And so, so here at the very beginning, we see God saying even to Cain, just like he said to his parents, I'm not going to throw you away. I'm not going to throw you away, right? And I think that's huge. Go ahead.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful because we see in the rest of Genesis chapter 4, the last few chapters, especially 17 through 26, we see why God wasn't done with him and why he didn't throw him away. We had 7 generations of Cain's line come and bring things like music into the human culture and metallurgy and things that we work with in our hands and that we create with our minds and our spirits. So even in Cain's sin, God redeems that for the betterment of humanity. And there had to be, I have to believe there was some beauty that Cain and his line found in their life because of God's salvation.
Yeah, absolutely. When something like that happens in your life, you live with it for the rest of your life in some ways, but there's always redemption. There's always a second chance. God never throws anyone away. Hey guys, I want to thank you for our time today. It was awesome. I enjoyed this every single Sunday. So I'm so excited about going forward with you guys on this. And thank you also for joining in. Those of you out there listening, we're so glad that you listen to this podcast. This week, again, Genesis chapter 4, 5, and 6, Psalm chapter 2, Matthew chapter 2. I pray that you follow along with us in your well Bible reading journey. And I pray that God blesses you and speaks to you all week long. Can't wait to see you again next week with podcast number 3. Until then, God bless you.